Well, welcome back to Morning at NTV. Now, from what you were seeing at William Street with Stephen Ibide now, the president yesterday mentioned that curfew would remain in place, and for one of the reasons would be medical purposes, to have you Ugandans and nocturnal activities stayed for a bit, but also to deter crime. As we can see from what he has reported, crime continues to be something within the country. Back to what the president said as he addressed the nation for the 8th time when it came to the fight against COVID-19 was the importance of life, health, over wealth in any way. And from what he mentioned, we're having the conversation and reactions. I'm joined in studio by Francis Mwijukye, who is the MP Buheju County. He's a commissioner in Parliament and also on the COVID-19 task force. I'm also joined by Mr. Rwakakamba, who is the founder of Agency for Transformation. Welcome to Morning at NTV.
Thank you.
I'll start by getting your thoughts on yesterday's address, and we'll start with you, Mr. Honorable Mwijukye.
Well, just like any other address of these days, the president spoke, I think, for 2 hours, 2 full hours, and until the end, you could think that he has come to re-emphasize the existing measures. Until he said in summary, so, and then he talked about, I think, 2 things. One, that private vehicles now can carry 4, up from 3, and that some of the border districts can now, the measures can be relaxed. Of course, we need to recall the background to these measures. These measures, like curfew, and like he said, was for purposes of security and health. But also the background when he said we are crossing, and he said that it was stop, and even said it in Uganda, Musirike, Muhuname, and you are speaking, his way of speaking local languages in national addresses. So, once we did that, Ugandans were very loyal, and the intention was to know where the enemy is coming from. So, we then knew, we saw where the enemy was coming from. So Ugandans played their part, we the leaders. Then after knowing where the enemy was coming from, have we played our part? We knew the problem was, for example, the trucks. How long has it taken us to fix that? We knew that the cases were coming from outside the countries. Outside the country. We know that the sports. So it has taken us long, really, for me, if you asked me to respond to what we thought would say, because these measures, the lockdown was supposed to be temporary, but some of these measures have stayed longer. And we say we will give, for example, borders, because they have lost their job, we shall give them some posho and shall give them some beans. Now, that was temporary, a measure. In the meantime, have some beans. Maybe by the time you finish the 5 kilograms, we shall have opened up. The lockdown is still on. The borders cannot operate. The posho is finished. The beans are finished. We are still telling them, you cannot operate normally. This is a time bomb. What's going to happen to these border cyclists? Because whereas they were carrying either food from the markets or what you call the cargo, now the private vehicles can go to the supermarkets and buy. People can go and use their vehicles. Then they were relevant because all private vehicles were not moving. Now, what is the business of borders if people are shopping using their vehicles? So at some stage, we risk a situation where borders really come out and say, we must work. And this is something we need to discuss and get solutions, and not just come and say, you see, we are stopping you, you cannot, it is risky. No. At the end of the day, how do they survive? they must survive. Now, and that's why I said some of these measures were temporary. But now they have 90 days down the road, people are not working. How do they survive? If you talk about curfew also, and the intention was security, the intention was health, it has effects. Offices now close at 2 p.m. because of the jam in town. What is going to happen? Can we relax this and maybe take it to between 8 and 9? If the intention is, we don't want interactions in bars, like he said. We don't want people to socialize at night. But now, why don't? And we have suggested this as Parliament and said we need to lift it to maybe 8 or 9. But his advisors, the Rwakakambas, must be telling him that no, maybe 7 is still okay. But if you ask me, I think we really need to relax this to maybe 8 or 9.
Well, bring in Mr. Rwakakamba to the conversation.
Before you bring that in, there are other measures really that we think need to be reconsidered. Measures like the places of worship. If we have opened public transport, if people from different parts of the country can sit in the bus and go, even when they register, why is it wrong for us to use the same approach for the places of worship? Can we also ask them to register the people who come to church? Like we ask the bus operators to register everybody who enters the bus, so that you know the contacts of the people. But you cannot say we are going to close churches until, because you see, churches work with government. They have the way they help us on the moral part. Now, if we are going to, people who go to church every Sunday, Monday and Tuesday, they are still very good people. They start forgetting around Thursday about what was taught to them in church. And then Sunday they go back anyway. But there are also those who go there every day. So my view is that we need to also critically look at the places of worship and see how we can relax a few of these measures, but also have relax, but also put in place measures on how we can stop the spread of COVID. And finally, maybe that we should discuss later, but you also talked about it, the idea of a scientific election,
which we are going to be getting into in just a bit. Yes, okay. Let's get your thoughts on this, Mr. Rwakakamba, because Honorable mentions a number of things that perhaps we shouldn't stay with all the measures they have been in place from the start. A few things should be relaxed and changed. What is your thought on that?
Well, I think so far it is important to note that since the lockdown started, we have one of the most or the fewer cases, really. You looked at the curve across the world, and that we are still fortunate enough that no person has lost a life. And I think as a country, that is something that we should really celebrate. I think overall, and thank the President, but also thank the frontline health workers, thank all those, including Mwijukye, who have been on the front line, because Honorable Mwijukye is on the National COVID Response Task Force, for having the vision, for working hard, for waking up early, for sleeping few hours, to really ensure that Ugandans are safe. So even before we go into all these other dynamics, I think that is very core and very important. But also congratulate ourselves for so far, heeding to the core of the politicians and the core of the administrators who have been helping us to go through this whole process. But having said that, I think last night's president's speech was quite different.
In what way? To
the extent that the president looked more to the technical scientific advice as the rationale behind the measures that he extended. Of course, my concern was on whether he is listening democratically to all scientists of all persuasions. Because I think there are really a number of strands. You have got the conservative, puritanical scientists who, for them, look at human health from a biological point of view. They don't look at human health from the spiritual, from the beyond the economic, from the spiritual, economic, and social life. So contextually, so those are the puritanical and conservative scientists. So we may want to know, are those the scientists the president is listening to? And usually those scientists, the conservative ones, all over the world, by the way, not just in Uganda, for them, they are proposing tightened lockdowns. They don't even want human beings to get out of their houses. And looking at the president's speech, there is this trend of a tendency that shows that he's listening to that strand of scientists. But they're also liberal scientists. And we have seen them across the world. The most prominent ones are in Sweden. Because Swedish response is essentially led by scientists. Even politicians are not talking, by the way. It is the scientists. And they are saying, let life continue. They are saying, let's try and develop what they call the herd immunity, H-E-R-D, herd immunity. You know, where you get this disease and then, you know, you don't get infected and then eventually the society gets protected. But of course, in some of those countries, they have seen more losses of life. But the losses of life have been in, you know, like elderly homes, where the vulnerables are. Of course, we don't want to lose our elders. But I think the president, in my view, needs to listen to the two sides of these scientists, get their views, so that he can develop a hybrid response that takes care of the human biological health, that takes care of the human economic health, that takes care of the spiritual health of the human. Because if the humans lose the spiritual, they lose the economic, even their biological is weakened, by the way. Even when they are not sick, they will get stressed up, they will have nothing to eat. So I think there is a need to rebalance the response, to rebalance the approach. And I really got a sense that the president is now listening to only those puritanical and conservative scientists. And I think the media should really debate where we are going in terms of this response. And I would have been happier, by the way, if NTV and other media entities in this country, because you owe it to us as citizens of this country, to figure out who are these scientists that are, for example, advising the president. Because yesterday the whole speech and the rationale, the scientists eventually took over, really.
And
okay? So, who are these scientists? What strand of ideological orientation do these scientists come from? And then get some other strand of scientists, put them on the other side, such that they can debate and give the country a democratic technical point of view, and then the politicians can pick and deliver for us what you would call a more hybrid response. That's point number one. Okay.
Before we go any further, when you
Yes.
talk about the hybrid response, as
Yes.
you mentioned the scientists, because even as the president talked, he said, as recommended by the scientists.
Yes.
But we know that we have a task force who we believe should be a part of these conversations.
Yes.
Honorable comes here and mentions the border riders.
Yes.
And also from what the president was talking about, we could get the sense that he understands what's happening on the ground when it comes to people talking about their kids, the border riders he mentioned, the people who have been complaining when it comes to the saloons. Is he hearing and not putting anything
No, what
into
I'm
place?
telling you is that the president feels the pain. And I can tell you, if he gave those conservative scientists, in my view, 100% leeway, and I've mentioned that even in the morning somewhere, I think we would be back in our houses, we would be totally locked up, even the 4 people in the car would not be there, the border districts would be closed. So this strand of scientists, I think, are more from the conservative are more from the puritanical point of view, and they are not looking at humans broadly. So I think the president needs to expand the bandwidth of rebalancing between liberal scientists or liberal technical point of view and the conservative point of view, and achieve a middle ground that I think is really hybrid. Like, for example, this issue of a curfew was for me very interesting, because you know, what are the rationale behind a curfew, and I agree with Mwijukye, for example, would have been the security. Okay? And then he now, of course, scientists told him it is also medical. Thank you very much. Like everything is medical. But in terms of how you implement it, you also have to look at the realistic obtaining conditions in the country. If you live in Kampala, for example, you leave home at, let's say, 8 a.m. Okay? You are in a jam for the entire day, bumper to bumper, 6 hours. So how many hours do you have to work? What is the rationale of actually leaving home? So I think the curfew that you impose in Kampala perhaps should be different from a curfew that you impose in Nyibingo village, where anyway it gets dark by 6 and people have to be home. There is no business to do. So, but to blanket the whole country without, you know, some tiered or clustered, because the scientists were using the word clustered and profiling, or a clustered system, I think those blanket measures that are not synchronized depending on the context of the country, I think creates a problem. So I also thought there was a problem there that needs to be rebalanced.
Okay, now taking a conversation to the timelines.
Yes.
We have seen the president over time in his addresses mention a timeline, 21 days, 14 days. In his last address, we do not hear anything about timelines. Where does that place Ugandans who now are uncertain? I am a tenant in one of their kids. I don't know what's next.
Just, of course, this last one point before Mwijukye can come in is that, yes, I think that could have been an oversight, and perhaps the Minister of Health can clarify, because whenever measures are put in place, it's very important to give it, to really give it a time frame. Because without a time frame, then how, you know, when will you be? When do you expect? When can one expect to get back in business, or to get back to activity? So I think, in my view, that could have been a slight oversight.
Okay, and Honorable, your comment to that?
Well, just like he has done, I expect him one of these days to come back and say, yes, I have been following people in the Facebook. I have come to make clarity on the following, because that has really been the order of the day of doing things, that you speak and then go on social media, see where people are saying this was not clear, and then you come back. Maybe that's why I don't want to speak for him really. That's why I didn't even know the history of the science. People that are advising him clearly, like my friend Rwakakamba, who is very close to him, and who knows which scientists are really advising. But the point, I think, that
you were on the task force, so
yes, I am on the task force, and that's what I'm saying. We make proposals, we discuss, we say now in the circumstances we think this, but at the end of the day it's up to him. And you really see, like you said, that he knows what is happening, he knows who is suffering. That means he has been given information. He has been told that border cyclists have now even invented a way of separating the passenger and the rider. So that must be coming from the task force. That must be information coming to him. But he says, even with that, I don't agree. So at the end of the day, it is his orders. And of course, in one way or the other, for me, that is not right. But I think what comes out of this is that yesterday's address was not clear.
Okay.
Was not clear, and that's why not just you, but many Ugandans are trying to understand what exactly is going to happen going forward.
Mr. Rwakakamba, you seem to have to say something.
Yes, because you see, there is one thing that the president mentioned, and that is that now we are entering the third phase of the pandemic, where you are beginning to see, clusters of community infections in a district of Mwijukye, in I think you mentioned Guru,
Amur district,
Amur, yes, Choter of course with the highest number, and now Kampala, where we are really. And he said now it is entering community, so it's a phase that is more dangerous. But I think the bigger point for me now would be to say, now that this phase is here, where do we focus? And I think we should be focusing more on, do we have the hospital beds? Do we have PPEs? Do we have health workers who are facilitated and democratized across the country to be able to respond? That is strand number one. Strand number two should be, let's invest in mass and massive awareness. Because at the end of the day, you can tell me to wear a mask when I'm somewhere, I remove it if I'm not aware. So it's about the human agency, the human individual. We must believe Ugandans, by the way, that once they have the information, that once they have the knowledge, they have got the capacity to discern, live their life while trying to also live healthier. Be economically vibrant, be spiritually vibrant, be health care, conscious and vibrant. So we cannot lock people and say, we think these guys don't know what they are doing. If we don't lock them up, they are not going to act. I think that can be problematic, and I think our response should look at the entire view of the human health.
Just to bring you into that response bit of it, one thing is, and the president hailed Ugandans yesterday, is that they have listened continually whenever he has advised. At one point in March, the issue was there were returnees who were bringing in COVID-19. And the next time, it was the cargo truck drivers who were bringing it in. The whole point of keeping us in lockdown was to ensure that we would not get to local transmission. We see local transmission has now come in when he mentions the clusters and the phase 3 that we have gotten into, which the Ministry of Health had actually advised on about 2 weeks ago. You're opening up now, easing movement for people from 3 to 1 point. We had nothing at all in terms of private movement, but we are seeing that we're entering a dangerous phase. At one point we weren't in a dangerous phase, but we were locked down. At another point we're at a dangerous phase, but we're moving. Isn't there a variation when it comes, even if you're not a scientist and stepping out of the box?
No, I think it was to understand the ways and means of the virus. Because at the time, I think everyone did not understand it. Now we understand the ways and the means of the virus. And some scientists have said, whatever we do, the way this thing moves, everyone is going to get it. But how do we manage it? How do we live with it? Do you see? Museveni the other day came up and said, if we lock down again, the economic life of this country is going to be destroyed really completely. So I think the managers of the country must rebalance. How long do we take this? Because if you overstretch it, and this is why I'm worried with these puritanical scientists, if you overstretch it, then people, because life is not just biological health, you have to feed this biological health, you have to do other things also spiritually to be able to survive. So if you overstretch it and you stretch the population, and the population loses trust in the public system, loses trust in these politicians, the public will come out. The public will protest. And you see, that's not what you want. So this is why the president was very, very careful to try and explain the rationale behind the measures and plead with the population. But I think that he needs both scientists to be able to rebalance this. This continuous stretch is going to reach a limit. And with some sections of the population, saloon operators, borders, it is beginning to bite. So we need to really anthropologically look at the population, see measures that, that get people to live, a full life. Whereas the president talks about that it's not about convenience, it's not about the money, it's about life. I mean, I agree, but all that must be looked at through, the prism of the entire person and how the person lives. So I think there is a problem of these puritanical and conservative scientists.
Okay, Honorable, I see you taking down some notes in response to what I had asked.
Yeah, you see, we can celebrate and even thank the medical workers, and that they have done a lot of work. But again, when we walked down, Parliament appropriated money to the health facilities, to health workers, to security. I move around the country. The health workers are still complaining. The health workers are still complaining. Some have no masks. You meet, in some parts of the country, you go and you meet security on the roads. They have no masks. And then you ask yourselves, where is this money? Now, we are lucky we may talk of the cases going high, but we can talk about people have not died of corona. But have we taken interest in understanding if 19 women were dying every day in child labor, how many are dying now as a result of the lockdown? How many people are dying of malaria now as a result of lockdown? So that we don't just get fixed in looking at corona and we start celebrating that nobody has died, when many Ugandans are dying of other related cases because of the corona situation. And that's why I am not one of those who are celebrating. Because I've just come back from the village. I visited even Sanyu Baby's nursing home. On Father's Day, I decided to go and be a father of those who have no parents. It's a border district from Mwijukye. And I can tell you, children in the baby's home were 40, they are now 57. I have buried in my constituency people who are dying because of malaria. People who are dying in child labor. So, whereas we celebrate nobody has died of corona, so Ugandans should die of what? Because death is death. And therefore, I think again, we need to put our heads together as a country, run away from the celebrations which really Ugandans are obsessed with, and critically analyze the challenges that Ugandans are going through. I saw the president talking about registering private schools, registering private universities, so that at some stage they can be helped. The challenge is not just to the private school owners, to the university, private university owners, but to the workers who are working in that university. The teachers who are teaching in the private schools. Because you're talking about some capital to the university at some stage. He's saying we are not going to give them cash, but some capital at some stage to the universities, to the private schools, primary and secondary. But now where are the teachers?
And also bring in the radios and televisions at that point, and education and that end, which I want you to bring you into, Mr. Rwakakamba, yes. Because due to time, we can't continue the conversation any further. Yeah. But to bring that part where he mentioned we shall give radios and televisions to help with education. Thinking about the rural areas, and yes, we've been seeing, even NTV has been running a program to help with teaching, say, with the candidates. But that student in perhaps Ibanda, who is going to listen to a radio to write down an equation, how does that work out?
You see, in 1918, there was a pandemic called the Spanish flu. You see, a pandemic can come and sweep millions. Millions of people died. Yes, we have healthcare systems and challenges in this country, and I don't think that all health workers are focused on COVID. They have to be focused on other diseases, because what Mwijukye is saying is very significant, and it has been in the public realm. And I think there should be a balanced response. So when a pandemic is sweeping, if you are not careful, it can sweep the whole country. It can sweep millions. So you have to contain, respond, and adapt. And I think we're at that level now of adapting, and everything else should be rebalanced. So I think the celebration is that whereas you see million cases in the US and hundreds of thousands dying, in a way, comparatively, we have managed to be where we are, not in a very bad situation. So I think the viewers of this television should understand that. I think on the issue of radios and TVs, radios in every village. We have over 392 radio stations in this country. The biggest friend of Ugandans is the radio. Of course, TVs serve as the first center because you have the capacity to get the news, so you syndicate in every other part of the country. So yes, for purposes of information like on COVID and all these measures, radios are extremely very critical. In terms of long distance learning, I think it helps, but there are limitations to it. I used to run schools called Bridge that were digital, and the one thing we used to do was to make sure that we have centralized lesson plans, such that teachers don't waste time in developing their own lesson plans. So if you have these lesson plans developed and you have different teachers on these radios, not just delivering these lesson plans, the same lesson plan that you're delivering on Rukunjiri FM is the same on Rira FM, is the same on Guru. Again, that helps take the children or the learners at the same level. But of course, all these are tentative measures as we try to adapt and get out of the pandemic situation.
Okay, well, we're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we're going to be taking a look at the scientific elections that the president did mention in his address, and also taking a look at the last leg when it comes to Parliament, this 10th Parliament. Keep it morning at NTV. Thank you for keeping it morning at NTV. Now, still taking a look at the president's speech from yesterday, we now get into the conversation on scientific elections. Now, the president had said options had been weighed and a hybrid election that can be constitutionally used to hold the elections on time but safely rather than have them postponed, given there is no cure or treatment within the country at the moment. We'll start with you, Honorable Mwijukye. You seemed to want to talk about it earlier on when we said this discussion.
Yeah.
So let's take you back there.
He's a direct beneficiary.
My challenge, of course, is about what we propose and how we implement it. Before we came to this, he was talking about radios. We have taken almost a month talking about masks. They are not yet in the villages. They are not yet in the community. The government masks. Now we are talking about radios. Radios are more expensive. I don't know how long then it will take the radios to get there. For purposes of children learning using radios, but also again for the scientific direction. So going directly to scientific direction, we have a constitution, and the constitution of the Republic of Uganda gives power to the people of Uganda, and I think that's Article 1. Now, this power Ugandans exercise through free and fair elections. The same constitution creates the Electoral Commission, and that's Article 60. Now, Article 61 gives functions of the Electoral Commission. We have acts of Parliament, the Presidential Elections Act, the Electoral Commission, we have the local government, and the parliamentary. Now, all these acts talk about the elections and how they can be conducted, but the authority, of course, is to the Electoral Commission. And what I'm trying to do is to give this background so that you see that before the Electoral Commission can come up with a roadmap, they need to put into consideration these acts and the Constitution. Whereas you're mandated to organize an electoral process, this electoral process must put into consideration the provisions of the Constitution. And that's why I have a challenge with a scientific election. Under normal circumstances, I should be celebrating and saying, you see, the new candidates will not be known. I am an incumbent. I am already known. I only need to appear on radio once. But what about the Constitution? You can't just say, don't you see COVID? And then you just go and drive anyhow in town and you say, you see, there is a curfew. You can knock everybody, but there is a curfew. No. So, I think the Electoral Commission has not harmonized with all stakeholders. And Parliament is one of the stakeholders. we were surprised by this announcement that we shall have a scientific election. I think what they should have done is to come to us and say we are stuck. Whereas we are mandated to organize a free and fair, to organize an election. In the circumstances, we cannot organize the normal one. So what do? Consult parliament, consult various political parties, the civil society, and then no. But you don't just consult one person and come out with the roadmap. Even when they don't have to consult on whether they should organize an election or not, like they said, because it is their mandate, but how they organize it, what type of election they organize, is already provided for in the Constitution. So for them to come up with this scientific election, sometimes they call it digital, I think they ought to have concerted this, because the election, again, the Presidential Elections Act talks about, for example, consultations. How do you expect candidates to consult? It talks about meetings between candidates and the people. How do you expect them to have meetings on radio? How do you expect them to meet on TV? How do you expect them to meet on their phones? It has been talked about the districts in the East that don't listen to any of the Ugandan radio stations. About 4 or 5 districts. I come from a constituency where about 3 sub-counties have no network, whether Airtel or MTN, not there. So how does that impact on them? Now, this, so before you come out really and declare, and I saw the spokesperson of the EC, talking tough, brushing off anybody who had issues with their roadmap. I think that's not the way to go. We need to move together as a country. If we must have an election, it must be that election that is free and fair, because the election doesn't talk about any other one. It must be free and fair. Now, in the arrangement of a scientific one, how do we make it free and fair? If we cannot make it free and fair, how do we move as a country?
Perhaps you should bring Morrison onto that one. How do we make it?
You see, my view, my view of public affairs is that institutions that succeed must put people at the center, because it is from the people where institutions derive legitimacy. And if you don't put the people at the center and you brush them off and you come up with it becomes a problem, because then you are not going to be sustainable. I think the reason why President Museveni has been here for all these years, he has always tried, of course without challenges, but to try and think from the people perspective and try and act from the people perspective. That's the reason why Museveni is here. Otherwise, if President Museveni was not putting people at the center and arrogant and behaving like some of these institutions I'm seeing, he will no longer be here. Okay? So, I am happy that the Electoral Commission, after it put out their scientific roadmap, came to TV here, I was watching on the spot and some other platforms, and said, this is not, carved in stone. It is a document to launch conversations, to launch consultations with the stakeholders across the political parties, those in parliament, under IPOD, but also all these stakeholders listed under the national dialogue process, the civil society, the media, and beyond. And I think, whereas the optimal should have been to even consult before the launch, but now they are willing to consult. And I have been informed that political parties, for example, met the Electoral Commission to begin these discussions on how to refine. And what I see is this roadmap of the Electoral Commission was a bit extreme. It lacked details, therefore confusing, non-practical. But I believe that with the stakeholdership discussions, it will come to the center. And standard operating procedures, if you have to meet 50 people, how do we meet? In Benin, there was just a recent election during COVID. there is a good, it was an imperfect one, but it provides an example of things we could start with. If it is 100 people who are going to meet, what are the, those, SOPs, standard operating procedures? Where do they meet? Do they meet in an open space? Should they be town halls? So there could be hybrid mechanisms that mix radio, which is very important, mix other media platforms, social media, television, radios, and every other element, blogs to reach the people. But there could also be a strand of the retail politics. Retail politics is this house-to-house, door-to-door politics. How do you do that? What are the standard operating procedures during the COVID? So I think there has to be a deep dive into the conversations that would lead to a hybrid election that happens and is free and fair.
Okay, now due to time, we're just going to move from the scientific elections into Parliament in the last leg of the race, the 10th Parliament. Now we're getting into a point where the Speaker has said that they're going to have to do a number of things rushed because of the fact that we're getting into the scientific elections and in a way that we have not seen it before. So a few things like bills will have to be moved quickly. And how will that affect the performance of the 10th Parliament? Start with you, Honourable Commissioner in Parliament.
Well, under Musak, of course, we have lost time as a country, not just Parliament. What we have lost time, what ought to have been done between March and now, most time has been spent on COVID and COVID-related matters, and subsequently, most things have changed. Under most circumstances, now we move to the last session of Parliament, the 5th one, which is the last, and from 4th June to October, this is the time we now are going to be looking at bills and statutory reports. And there are many reports really. And yet again, it is a time where members have started running to their constituencies, given this type of roadmap. I can imagine the members of Parliament who have to go through primaries. And now the primaries, and again, going back to what we were discussing, the scientific one, parties are supposed to do their party structures. They have not yet done party structures. They are supposed to have delegates conferences. They have not yet done that. They are supposed to come up with leaders. Now, how are they going to come up with leaders? By again, there are deadlines already. So this is definitely going to affect the operations of Parliament, but in the circumstances, we are saying that we are supposed to be considering bills and statutory reports between June and October. Of course, you remember we have been considering the budget, at least we did that for some time. Now, the ministerial reports are now going to come to us. Now, we are supposed to put facts to figures. We gave you money. Now, how are you going to spend it? And this is the interaction now between committees and the ministers and agencies. So, 2nd October 26, we are supposed to have recess. Then. Of course, these are the dates in the calendar. Then 18th December to 4th January, we are supposed to have that Christmas recess again. Then 5th January, 28th May, we'll be handling the budget processes. But now, going to the reports, we have the budget monitoring reports, we have the budget performance reports, we have reports on tax expenditure, microeconomic and fiscal performance reports. There are many reports on petroleum fund. Now, these reports are reports, some of them we have not yet handled. Okay. And again, I'm just giving you the time. But we also have pending bills between which are supposed to, which we are going to consider and finish, by the way. The pending bills, the marriage and divorce bill of 2009 is still pending. We have the Uganda Forest Association bill of 2010, so we still have to look at it. The Succession Amendment Bill 2018, the National Graduate Scheme Bill 2018, the Administration of Parliament Amendment Bill 2019. So we also have the coffee bill 2018.
Seems that Mr. Morrison would want to say something
yeah,
here.
because what Mwijukye is telling us is that this broader business of parliament. But you see, legislative arms of government all over the world have got 4 core responsibilities: representation, which is representing their people; legislation; budgeting; and oversight.
True.
So I think there should be a scorecard, in my view, because this parliament is going, it is ending.
And that is a scorecard,
Okay.
a
So the
scorecard we'd want to
scorecard
know.
for me has been based sometimes on the number of bills, the number of programs. So what I see in parliament is that there has always been absence of prioritization in terms of what kind of strategic things do we need, for example, do for the country. One of the things that the country has always been concerned about, for example, as we go to elections, are electoral reforms. Okay? And members of parliament, they may say executive didn't bring this, didn't bring that, but they can bring a private member's bill, they can debate day and night to make sure that really things happen. Well, there has been some level of independence at the level of the leadership of parliament, and thanks to some of the leaders there, in terms of trying to cause some inconvenient but productive contestation between the branches of government. And I think in any democracy, that is core and important. But I think we may want in future a parliament that is, yes, focused on business, but also it's a governance branch. But if it spends its time in technocratic, this coffee beer, blah, 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 these ones should come to parliament when the technical people have done the right job, and in few minutes it is done. They have read, they have iPads, they do it. I think the bigger focus for any parliament should be the governance questions, human rights questions, freedoms, you see, and creating a greater society. And I think, in my view, broadly, I don't think that the parliament has scored strongly on the governance questions and creating a greater society.
As a member of parliament, Honorable, what do you have to say to that as we wrap up?
Well,
because you can represent those.
I think I really want to agree with him that there are governance issues. He knows really that the government he's talking about is not interested in electoral reforms. He knows. He's just pretending. He really knows. He knows that the Rwakakamba Constitution Amendment Bill was frustrated by government. He knows. He knows that even up to now, it is one of the pending ones. And you know why it cannot proceed? Government is not interested.
No, because you have complied. Because you see, listen, when you are in parliament,
just a second,
and things go by, and you keep complying, and you don't raise it day and night, but because these are contestations.
You see,
What do you have to say about those contestations?
I really don't want to, just like my brother, I really don't want to pretend. He knows the type of parliament we have. He really knows that the percentages, and that therefore once the government is not interested, he knows what happens in parliament. So, and to say that the members have not, remember I was talking about Rwakakamba. Rwakakamba was not given a certificate. We had to automatically proceed because the provided days elapsed, and they said we can proceed, but government was not interested. So, whereas I also understand that there are members of parliament who listen to their parties more than to their constituencies, who look at whatever they are going to discuss, say, what will my party chairman think? What about the president? Will I be summoned? Whereas I know we have those, but I also know that we still have members of parliament who have done their work as members of parliament in their constituencies, but also in the house. But at the end of the day, whatever we come up with, whether it is governance, whatever reports we come up with, are gathering dust. I also know, I saw the other time the president was talking about parasites. He was talking about Uganda Revenue Authority. Up to now, there is a handshake report. It was done. Instead, he opted to praise the people who are stealing money. Now I saw him lamenting. about reports of Parliament. So Parliament, even the few reports we have come up with, where are they? But now, we are a legislating body.
But you see the way
just a second.
The way Honorable speaks as if Parliament is a public relations.
Just a second.
It's a legislature of a country.
You see, we have come up with reports and talk about food distribution. The minister came and said parliamentary role is advisory. You know, advisory. We have decided to ignore it. Now, maybe you can ask me, so now that you have been ignored, what have you done as a country?
Because what you're trying to say is that a number of times you as the legislature have come out to say things and try to do things, but you have been shut down. But are you going to continue? Because as you go ahead to ask for your vote in the next election, some of these things will be looked at, or at least you'll be saying you're going to come back and try and do better. But
it goes back to Ugandans. Where do we need more members of parliament? Do we need more members of parliament on the side of the people who are going to just comply? Because we have, you know, we even have elderly members of parliament who have done well. So it's not about, for me, it's not about parties, but it's about which members of parliament are you electing. Are they those who are just going to sit and wait for the president to talk to them, and wait for the chairman to talk to them, and wait for their party president to talk to them, or are you going to elect leaders? Because if we had bigger numbers in parliament, who serve the people's interest, who are not scared of their political parties, I am sure would be doing better than we are doing now. I'm not saying we have not done much. No, we have done a lot, but I'm saying we could do better depending on the members of parliament we have. Otherwise, you can come and say the problem is parliament. I have been in parliament. Parliament is part of the is not part of the problem, but they also they are victims. Okay,
well, we just have to stop the conversation there for today. Thank you so much for joining us on Morning at NTV. As we draw closer to the 2021 elections, these are more and more conversations that we're going to be having. We were joined this morning by Honorable Pres Museveni, who is a Member of Parliament for Mwijukye County, and Mr. Morrison Rwakakamba, who is the Founder Agency for Transformation. Thank you for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
Well, that does it for Morning at NTV's Tuesday morning. Thank you so much for joining us wherever you have been. If you want to be a part of the show, you can always use the hashtag Morning at NTV. Have a good day.